Right, so we are out yet again with the Matrix scammers, and today I'm going to do a bit of feeder fishing just for a change. So we've come to a lovely little intimate, nice short commercial where I want to talk about the choice of feeders. I mean, it's something that a lot of us don't do enough, if I'm honest, definitely myself included, is that when it comes to throwing a method feeder, a pellet feeder, an open alloy feeder, whatever your choice of feeder is, it's often not thought about enough. I mean, you're just choosing the feeder because that's what you're happiest with that bait or for that type fishing or whatever else. And what I want to talk about today is definitely my thinking behind why I'm using certain feeders and the changes that you make throughout a session, that by swapping from one feeder to another, that it's amazing the difference it can make in terms of efficiency, attracting fish into your feg, all those little things that you need to think about a bit more to take your feeder fishing to just that next level. I mean, it's great when it's getting towed round, nice and easy as lots of fish feeding, but when it's not, and you've got to think about it a little bit more, or when there's 3 million fish in the peg and it's hard to get a bite, by making a few little subtle changes that I want to show you today, hopefully that means that the fish is on the bank in your net instead of rattling around and not taking your bait properly because of lots of little things. So, very quickly, before we go into any fishing, which is what I want to focus on today, definitely want to catch a few fish today, is I want to talk about why I'm choosing which feeders and saying that I want to show you the piles that they create and the reasons why I'm thinking the way that I do in what feeder I'm going to choose at different points of the day. So, quickly thinking behind what I'm going to babble about today pretty much, and what I want to use is a combination, as I said, between a method feeder and a pellet feeder, because definitely using the two, it just allows me to be a bit more flexible, just work out what the fish are doing and hopefully get bites a lot quicker once the fish arrive. So pellet feeders are a right funny thing for me in that they work at the two extremes. It's definitely where I use them. In the winter when it is absolutely rock bottom and I want tiny little piles, I'll nearly always choose a pellet feeder above anything else, just because it creates the tiniest amount of bait in the most accurate way sort of thing, and I've not got to worry about them coming in and being all scatty the way they feed in the winter. So that little pile that you're going to see with that one is pretty much the perfect sort of pile I want to create during the winter when I'm fishing for an odd carp. So a venue that I fish for quite a bit, go to quite a bit, Mescar, that's about chucking to flat bottoms, being patient, little pile. Those feeders have been phenomenal for it. Also for me, spring, early season sort of F1 fishing as well, chucking up to flat bottoms. Definitely, I've got to emphasize that flat bottoms with pellet feeder are massive. It's very tricky to fish them on an incline, then that dictates a different feeder. But whenever I can chuck to a flat bottom, tight across to an island, or maybe even open water, creating that tiny little pile can be phenomenal for little fish. Just being busy, just getting bites quick, or creating the tiniest pile. So it's either really fast fishing or really slow fishing. That's going to be my choice for a pellet feeder. Today, we're going to combine the two. As I said, I've got my method feeder, what I'm going to use to build my peg to start with a method. And in today's case, there are many fish feeding, or we think there'll be. I've had one sneaky go and it feels like there's lots of fish present. And a method feeder is great for putting lots of bait into your peg really quickly and getting the fish homing in on that bait coming in. But what it can do is when they get a little bit erratic, especially with smaller fish as well, is that you get lots and lots of indications and it's a bit trickier to get a bite. Yes, there's lots of things you can do. You can change your mix and all sorts of little things to get bites quicker with a method feeder, but we spoke about that before. Today I want to focus on the quick fix of swapping to a pellet feeder and the things I can do to make myself get a bite really quickly. Once the fish are there in my peg, I've built it up with a method feeder during the summer with a lot more bait going in than what there would be on a pellet feeder. But by putting this sort of thing on, I create a very, what's the word? It's a one-dimensional trap. They can only pretty much come into it from one direction, and the bait, just like it'd be on an open alloy feeder, is very much contained. So it's not got the spread that it would on a method feeder. It's a lot more contained in the end of that feeder. So when a fish comes in, it sucks in the lot, takes my bait, and it's very rare a fish visits your feeder without giving you a bite. I mean, if a fish has been there, it's probably the most confident I'm ever going to be with a pellet feeder that I'm not going to miss out on a fish being in the location, feeding on my, I'm going to call it loose feed, my pellets, and not taking my hook bait. So that's pretty much what I'm going to show. I'm going to drop them both in a tub just so you can sort of see as well the different spreads, what I'm on about, in that how much more contained they are. The method feeder, I've put that in the corner a little bit, but we've seen that 100 times before. It spreads out to a decent sort of area once that bait's all breaking down. Not that you necessarily want that, but that's a story for another day. But with a pellet feeder, it just stays much nicer. Yeah, a lot less than pellets spread away from the feeder. It's all contained. It just makes a lovely pile that I feel I'm much more likely, much more quickly much more quicker, a lot quicker, I'll probably receive a bite because of it, because my bait's right where I want it to be. Right, on to a little bit of fishing, and I've had 5 sneaky casts in that. What I want to do, very, very similar to many, many situations where I'm looking for, well, to catch lots of fish on a feeder. I've got to build me peg, I've got to get fish there. And while I don't want to start loose feeding yet, I've got my 6 mils ready to do that for later, at first, what I just want is regular casts with my method feeder. So that's what I've started on. I've set up a method feeder on one rod, and I've set up a pellet feeder on another. I could have done both on the same and just interchanged them, but they're a bit angry. So there's a very good chance I'll end up losing one of them because I'm having to pull that hard. But anyway, so I've started on method feeder, almost went like textbook as I'd expect it to do, in that I've chucked it in, I've had a fish first chuck, all nice and clean, no indications, just sat there straight round, went round. Exactly what I want to happen. The more I cast, the more indications I'm getting. So it's going in now and it's rattling about a lot. I think there's a few other fish there. I think there's some small fish there as well, but it's taking a long, long time to catch a carp now, or longer than I'd like, considering there's a lot of fish in the peg. So I'm going to dolly him in now. So I'm just going right in the middle of that. Right in the middle of that gap. So I'm chucking it onto a nice flat bottom there. It's probably about 1.5 foot, 2 foot deep. But there seems to be a lot of fish milling around the area, but because it's flat as well, because I'm not chucking to an island, or not to a slope rather, the fish are all over the place. They're not just coming in one way. They're scattered, they're all over the place, and because of that I'm getting lots of liners, lots of indications. It's a bit messy, if anything. I mean, I feel I could be catching a fish a bit quicker with a better pile. And as I said, there's lots of ways of doing that. I could easily swap my method mix, mess about with how it breaks down and all that sort of thing. But because I just want to feed pellets there, I've got some ground bait just in case, but really I just want to feed pellets, just because I don't want to have loads of little skimmers and little fish in the peg. It just leads itself perfectly to fishing a pellet feeder instead. So hopefully that's what I'm going to swap to next. And so the plan from that point is just swap about. I mean, start on my method feeder, put bait in my peg, like I said, build my peg up, get some fish there. Then I can go on my pellet feeder when I feel there's a few fish in the peg, have a really, really fast arrival, catch, don't know, a run of X amount really, really quickly because they're coming on it quicker. But then if that competition's slightly depleted, swapping over to my method feeder again, gaining the confidence, ringing that dinner bell, putting a load more bait in the peg, with quick casts to put a load of feed on the deck, then that can bring them back into my peg. And it's just that cycle of swapping between the two. That's what I'm on about. I'm getting lots of little indications now it's not getting towed in, and I'm definitely pretty sure, let me just spin that a bit, I'm pretty sure there's a way that I can turn these bites into or these indications into a much faster bite. Don't get me wrong, it's going around eventually if I sit and be patient, but I'm not patient. I want to catch fish as fast as possible, get back out there and catch another one. So I think I'm going to be nice and patient with this one, give it one more cast. Yeah, give it one more cast after this, just to make sure there's plenty of bait in. And I'm still seeing these indications, and then I think it's time to swap over to a pellet feeder, but there's a little twist that I want to talk about before we do so. So eventually that one's gone round, but it took a long time. Well, I say a long time, it probably took about 3 or 4 minutes to go round, when I'm 100% convinced that there were quite a lot of fish in the peg. And I should have been getting one quicker. So I'm going to have one more cast on this just because it is early and I don't want to rush it too much just yet. So I'm going to have one more cast and then I'm going to swap to a pellet feeder and just see how much quicker I get a bite. The perfect sort of stamper carp. This is slightly bigger than the average, but then they are the ones that are willing to feed, and you can get a little bit excited when there's lots of them in your peg. Yes, perfect. Right in the middle of the bottom lip, that one. Right, well finally, that's gone round, and it's been weird. I think I'm not understanding, or I wasn't understanding the pegging. I thought there were lots and lots of carp there, but I think there's lots and lots of other fish there as well. But still, even with it being other fish, the other fish are worth catching. I've had two decent skimmers, a pound a piece, before I've had another carp. So what I'm going to try and do is just home them in a bit more by swapping to that pellet feeder next. Feels like a better on this as well. And see if I can get bites a little bit quicker, because definitely with that flat bottom, the fish are all over the place. So I'm just going to try and home them in. Oh, that was a prop one, that as well. Fell off, but anyway, definitely cute for a change. There's nothing wrong with that. That was just a folly offy one, that. So now, swap over to my favourite, if anything. And what I've gone with is a smaller one, just to begin with, weirdly, because I just want to see, the fish are already there, there's loads of bait in my peg, so I just want to see how quickly I can get a bite with a small amount. I mean, I've got the option, without even undoing everything, I can swap over to the larger one. But to begin with, the small one is going to be the way to go. But before I do it, I want to have a little chat about how really, really important it is to load these properly. Because say they're not as straightforward as a method feeder sort of thing. I think there's a few little tweaks that if you play about with the loading a little bit more with your pellet feeder, it just makes it far more, what am I going to say, efficient. Right, so before I get to launch it into the lake and impale a carp, I want to talk a little bit about loading pellet feeders, because it's a bit different to the norm. It needs to be done in the right way, mainly because I'm fussy, but just to make sure you're hooking a fish as efficiently as possible. I'm using that word a lot today, efficiently, but it's definitely key for this type of method. First, we'll talk about length to hook length, because for me, I'd much rather have really, really short hook lengths for this, 2, 2.5, 3 inch. It's about right, because the thing that I'm after is to keep all of my hook length inside the feeder. Yeah, when it comes to a pellet feeder, I don't like the big loop of my line coming out, because I feel like that makes my bait leave the pile that it wants to be over. So it's sort of accentuated a bit more on a pellet feeder because it's pulled back. I don't want that. But with a 2 inch hook length, I get away with it because there's such a smaller length of line. However, if I want a longer hook length, then I employ the services of a bit of a float stop halfway down it. And it works in a funny way in that pretty much all I want it for is to push my hook length into my feeder. It's just a bit of an obstacle that means I can grab hold of it. An obstacle, an object that I can push into my feeder. It keeps it where I want it to, which I'm going to demonstrate now. So that's my hook length. In today's case, I've got 4 inch hook length of 018. So nice, quite a, what are we going to call it? Quite a springy line, because it's got a bit of thickness to it. And the way I lay my feeder is this. Put my first layer in, not too much, just a bit of a layer into the top of the feeder. Yeah, next I get that bead and I push that in as well, making sure all my hook length is in there as well. But the bead, so you could do it with just hook length, but it's just fiddly. Getting your finger on that hook length, pushing in. A bead just gives you, or what we're going to call it, a float stop, just gives you a lump to push in. Next, straight in with my main layer of pellets, yeah, which nearly completes the feeder. And then you'll see all I'm left with is that tiny little 10mm sort of hook length left with all the rest of the hook length in here. That what I need to do is fold it back on itself, place my pellet how I want it, so it's sat like I've told many, many times, so that hook's up and proud, ready to impale into the fish, and then just cover that last layer over with my last bit of pellets. So once I get into my routine, I can do that lovely and quickly, but be fishing as efficiently as possible. So I've got no big loop in my hook length coming out. It's all encased within the feeder, but you wouldn't know. But what it does allow is that obviously I'm keeping within fishery rules if I need to use a 3, 4 inch, whatever the rules stipulate, but also there's less chance of the fish touching that line, upsetting itself, but more importantly, touching that line that's sticking out the back of the feeder and moving my hook bait, kicking my hook length away, which could cause foul looking at fish, or more importantly, could lead to less chance of the fish finding my bait because it's not over my pile, which I'm a big, big fan of. So only a little step, but big thing for me, that loading the feeder in that way, definitely make sure it's done as efficiently as possible for me. Oh, as I said, they're pulling so hard, but that way, so much quicker. I mean, with that meth feeder, I've been waiting Been like up to 5 minutes for a bite while I know they're in my peg. Whereas that one, first chuck, and there's no sneaky editing, I promise. That has gone straight round within 2.5 minutes. It's just little things like that without having to mess about too much with your mixers. When it is just pellets, literally swapping to a different feeder has got me a bite so much quicker. And off a proper one as well. It's gone lovely now as well. Summer's here. Lovely chaplain. Like that. Fish are a little bit red from spawning, but they're definitely starting to eat now. So I'm going to get him in the net and I'm going to catch another one. So hopefully that should be the case now. That's what I generally do find that happens, is that I swap to it. It's not a fix for the entire session, definitely not. It's just a quick fix, or not. It's a quick way of gathering a few fish. I mean, getting a little run of fish, putting a few in my net, and then very, very quickly I'll swap back to loose feeding a few pellets over the top, and also swap back to that method feeder just to get the bait in the peg again. And so by swapping through both all day, you just feel like you're doing something. Instead of just waiting for them to arrive and sticking with the same thing, you definitely feel that there's purpose and there's a reason why you're swapping between the feeders that you are doing. Same again, I've loaded that exactly the same way, tucking that bead right in, and then I bring this down, put my hook where I want it, and just as I showed you before, all of the hook length is pretty much completely encased in the feeder. So I've not got any loops of line wanting to pull my hook bait free, things that the fish could touch against. Literally everything is encased in that feeder, like I said, while still remaining long enough to be flexible so the fish can suck it and the bait will come towards them. So whether that bead helps that as well, don't know, but for me, it definitely gives me a bit of confidence that it just looks nice. It's sitting properly on the bottom and my bait's where I want it to be while still being able to hook the fish efficiently. Let's see what happens here. So back in, we're in, see how quickly we get a bite on that. So you do find on this as well, the indication seems to be a little bit less. I'm not getting anywhere near as many rattles as I were with that method feeder. So whether that's a case of not quite as many fish in the peg, or whether it's a case of them coming in and eating it instead of, I think that was one then. One moved up my peg when I lifted into that. Here again, a couple of pellets in. Make sure that bead's stuck in the feeder as well. I don't want that sticking out. So pull your bead into slot. It is beautiful. So it's just getting the right position of that bead. So I know my hook length's the right sort of length. That's perfect again. Perfect. Not seen any for a bit. They were waving at me before. There was not carp in the peg waving. I've not seen any indications for a bit. Maybe it's not quite as shallow as I thought it was here. Maybe they're just very long carp. So they were waving. Right, hopefully we'll see with this one now. See them again. See how quickly they're on that. How quickly a proper bite comes. I said that one then, that was me being useless, just lifting in and it had knocked itself. I missed the bite. So whether it's a little fish or not, I don't know. There's quite a lot of roach and skimmers there. Just going to give it a few pellets over the top, just so mine's not the odd one out. So by putting a few 6mm over the top, so it's lovely range this to be able to feed over the top. Yes, it's going to attract fish. It's another element that I can keep rafting over the top, bring fish in with the noise, but I don't want them to get preoccupied on 6mm pellets. I want them just enough to still be competing for the bait that's there, but as well, because I'm feeding 6mm pellets, that's what I've got on the hook. So it just makes mine blend in a little bit more, because I definitely think that happens a lot when it comes to feeder fishing of all types, in that they can often see your hook bait as the odd one out, be it a wafter, a maggot, whatever it is, and eventually they'll understand that it's sort of danger and they'll avoid it. Whereas if they're picking the same sort of thing up in the peg, and getting away with it, then there's far more chance, or I believe there's far more chance that they'll readily pick my hook bait out and less chance of them treating it with suspicion. So it's nice, like a completely different peg throwing this. And I chuck it in and it just sits there. So I'm not getting any indications pretty much at all now. I'm just sat and sat and sat, and then that last one had a tiny indication and then it rattled. This one, I don't know if it moved a little bit then. It was pretty much yet to move, which is what I want. It gives me confidence that my pile's there, it's all in place. I'm not worrying that have the fish been in my peg, cleared me out, like I often feel happens on a method feeder, that when your hook bait's been kicked out the way sometimes, you often have a little window of activity where you get lots of indications on the feeder, they're clearing your bait out, and all of a sudden it stops, but they fail to eat your hook bait. Whereas with this, it doesn't tend to happen. If you get indications, you always do tend to get a bite. Right, so it's taken a little bit longer than expected, that one, and the weather's changed a little bit, but definitely without a doubt today, the pellet feeder is providing or proving definitely the most efficient by far of the two, in that there's not anywhere near as many fish feeding as I was hoping, but the difference in, what am I going to call it, efficiency and bites, definitely. When my feeder's in and there's a fish there, I'm sitting there and it's going straight away. As soon as the fish is on top of my feeder, I'm getting a bite. And with the pellet feeder, I'm getting a bite within 2 minutes, I'd say, whenever I'm getting one. The method feeder, however, is very, very different today in that it's rattling all over the place. I think it's a lot to do with little fish. I mean, it's giving the little fish a much bigger chance to clear me pile out, because that pile is so largely dispersed as opposed to the pellet feeder. And what in turn it's doing, it's letting them clear it out before the carp's getting a chance. Whereas this little bad boy is creating a lovely little pile. When a carp is getting to it before the silvers do, I'm getting a bite really, really quickly. So again, another little different twist on the sort of things. But that is how I want you to see things. Definitely pellet feeders for me, I say they're the two bottom and top end of the scale. If I want to catch really, really, really quickly, there's loads of fish in my bag, that is definitely the way to go in terms of the bite happening faster, but also the efficiency of loading it up and everything. It's all geared towards fast fishing. It can be phenomenal when you're catching little fish, or there's lots and lots of them in your peg. And ultimately, the other side of the scale as well, if there's not many fish in your peg and you want that lovely, lovely, really tight pile, just as I'd feed on the pole pretty much, then that's where I'd do things for me, just to make sure I'm getting the most out of my feeder fishing. So definitely well worth a look at both. It's not just about chucking that method feeder or that pellet feeder all day. By having two set up, it just gives you a bit more versatility, and as we keep mentioning, it is all about catching a few more fish than everyone else and say making the most of your session. So hope you enjoyed that one. We'll see you all very, very soon.